Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mostly Nerdy Podcast, the show where we talk mostly about nerd stuff, but sometimes about some other things as well. I'm your host, Curci, and welcome to the first ever episode of a Mostly Nerdy Podcast. This is the show that I have been wanting to do for quite some time, and I just never actually pulled the trigger. I've have recorded episodes before, have taken a look at it. They didn't really turn out like I wanted them to, so I never put them out. But this is the episode where I am going to do it. I'm going to put it out there and see what people think. You know what? Screw it. Why not? So as you can guess from the title of the show, the topics that are spoken about are mostly nerdy topics. So generally, this week we have E3. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dark Phoenix. I saw that yesterday. I have some other things that I might want to talk about, but anything from video games, movies, TV shows, just things that I would feel are worth talking about, things that I want to give my opinions on. Now, it is called the Mostly Nerdy Podcast, so we might talk about some other topics that might not be categorized as a nerdy topic. So I leave that up for interpretation. Now, the way that I want to do this is the show will try to keep to about an hour long. We might grow a little over, might go a little under, but that's the length that I'm going for. Now, I'm going to upload the full episode to YouTube on my channel, but I'm also going to separate different segments into smaller, more absorbable, more digestible videos. So, for example, we're going to be talking a lot about E3. Might break things down by press conference. So it might be, here's the EA video, here's the Microsoft video, here's this video, here's that video, and then here's the Dark Phoenix video, and then if we get to the other stuff, we'll get to the other stuff. That's generally how these episodes are going to work. So I hope you guys enjoy. I just kind of want to dive right in here, and we're going to talk about E3. And I'm going to be honest with you, E3 this year snuck up on me. Now, I don't know if that's because I've been playing less video games lately, and I'm not keeping as close of an ear to the ground as I have in the past. But this year, it turned into June, and I was like, oh man, when's E3? And then I looked it up, and I was like, oh my god, E3 is like this week. I usually have enough time to put together some sort of prediction video, some guesses, some things I'm looking forward to. I didn't have time to do it this year because it just all of a sudden was boom, there it is. Now, E3 this year, I'm going to come out and just say that, in my opinion, I don't think it was a good E3. And I think that has a bit to do with the changing industry and E3 not changing with it. The show of E3 is not changing. Less than stellar press conferences. EA didn't have a press conference. They did something similar to what Nintendo has been doing lately, with just doing a stream highlighting the games that they want to highlight, which really boils down to just one game, and that's the new Star Wars game. But even Microsoft and everybody else, they just kind of did what they knew that they had to do and didn't really have a wow factor. And not to say that E3 owes me anything, because I thought about this before. I've had these discussions with people online of E3 doesn't owe me anything. You know, a lot of people were asking me, what do you expect? What were you expecting from E3? And I was like, I kind of would have appreciated the wow factor, but E3 doesn't have to entertain me. E3 is a show that is meant to market toward retailers, investors, but it's also meant to market the games. You sell your game a lot better when it demos at E3 and the developers are there walking you through everything that's happening, drawing attention to the different things. But I just feel like as a show, like I always look back to what Sony did a few years ago before the God of War came out. It was just that press conference. I don't remember the exact year, but it was like game. There was no developers talking over it. It was just demo, trailer, demo, trailer, a little bit of an intermission, and then they went right back to it. It was a phenomenal press conference. It just held my attention the whole time, and it hit you with all these big surprises. It was just such a brilliantly executed press conference. And then we go to Bethesda before Fallout 4 came out, when a few weeks before E3, they announced Fallout 4, they put out the trailer for it, and then for Bethesda's press conference, their hour-long press conference, the last 30 minutes was all Fallout 4, showing you extended demos, showing you what their plans were for the game, what you can expect. It just blew everybody's mind, and it put the cherry on top by saying, yeah, it's going to come out later this year. We didn't get any of those this year at E3. They were just by the numbers. They just did what they were there to do, and Sony never even showed up. They just decided to skip it, which, to be honest, Sony at this point with the PlayStation 4, they've owned this generation. This generation from the get-go was theirs, and they've just completely controlled it. So they don't feel like they have to be at E3, and they don't. But that's my general impression of E3 going forward. I do want to kind of put a little bit of a focus on the things that were at E3, but I want to start by talking about the Google's new platform, the Stadia. Prior to E3 this year, because you know how these dates work. I mean, you have a start date to E3. It was June 11th, which was a Tuesday, but that's when the floor opens up, so the attendees can go in there and they can play the games and they can speak with the developers if they have like media credentials or whatever. I don't actually know how it works. I've never been at E3, but that's when the floor opens up that day. Now, we know that before that, probably the weekend before, the Saturday, the Sunday, the Monday, those are the days where the press conferences start up. This is when all the announcements kick off, when all the trailers and the demos go. These are what we can expect for the future later this year and early next year and even further beyond that as well. But even beyond that this year was the announcement, not the announcement of the Stadia, we knew about the Stadia, but the reveal of what to expect with the Stadia. Now, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there. I think the Stadia is a very interesting concept, and I do believe that it is the first of what I believe to be a wave of these on-demand gaming platforms. I think the Stadia is the first of many. Now, the interesting thing here is that it's coming out later this year in November. I don't have the exact date, but it is coming out in November. It is a gaming streaming service. So the way this works is that you get a controller, you get, I guess, the application, or if it's a browser, I'm not really 100% remembering what they said, but you stream it through the internet, you stream it through Google, and that's how the game works. You buy the games, presumably, you have a subscription fee to keep things moving, and you just download, or not really download, you don't have to download, it's just on demand, which works really well for this world that is all about instant gratification. You know, if I want to watch an episode of South Park, I pop open Hulu and I have every episode of South Park at my disposal. And I can watch South Park whenever I want. If I want to watch it right now, I could do that. But also if I want to watch a movie on Netflix, I want to watch Avengers Infinity War. I'm going to go ahead and pop open Netflix. Boom, I'm watching Avengers Infinity War. Just by a couple of presses of a button, bam, there it is. Don't have to worry about downloading. Don't have to worry about purchasing. I already pay for the subscription service, so it's already there. But we don't have that for video games. The way it works right now, whether you're on a console or you're on a PC, you either buy the physical copy that requires you to download it locally, or you buy a digital version, which still requires you to download it locally so that it plays locally. But this is a platform that requires you to stream from the internet. So once I buy the game, once I buy access to the game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey or whatever, all of a sudden, bam, there it is. I can play it. But there's a couple of unknown factors here. Number one, it's the fact that it's streaming. It is reliant on your internet service. And people who have great internet, I'm sure, are probably going to have very little issues here. But we also have to consider the places that don't have great internet. If you live in a place that doesn't have great internet, you're not getting the best out of this. You're getting reasonably fine quality and frame rate, but it's not the best it can be. So you're not getting the best out of the game. But also we got to take into consider input lag. When I press A, how long does it take for A to go to their system and come back to me so that I can see it happen? This is really going to affect even multiplayer, because not only is the game streaming to me, but it's also having a multiplayer element. So how long does it take for me to put the input to go to their system, to go to me, but then also to somebody else? There's a lot factoring in here. And also we have to consider how many people on day one are going to be affecting the bandwidth of the overall system. So the whole idea of DDoS attacks is denial of service. So the way that this works is they have a system that just fires off multiple requests constantly, and it just crashes the system. And so a lot of times on day one, servers are unprepared for the amount of people going in. Now, we're talking about Google here. So Google, I'm sure, is going to have the servers that can support it. But again, there's just a lot of data going around here. Also, speaking of data, we have to consider data caps. So if you live in an area where there is a data cap, there was an article on Polygon where they said that in about 60 hours, you're going to transmit or use a terabyte of data. And if you have a data cap, that might be an issue. These are all things that you have to consider. If you live in a not great area where there's not great internet, you have to consider how that affects your games. And is this even going to work? This is very experimental. You know, it works on paper. I believe it is the future. I feel like eventually we're going to get there. Somebody would have had to have made the first step, and the Stadia is doing that. I'm just worried about how it works in practice. You know, once it's fully launched. I know they did a couple of tests here and there, and it went well, but until they actually put it out, I don't know how it works. I'm not going to try it day one. But then we also have to factor in this whole idea of net neutrality, or rather lack thereof. Net neutrality is not a thing anymore, which means that if we live in a future where the Stadia has taken off, so not only did you pay for the service, you are subscribing to the service, you are paying for the games to be able to play them. But let's say, for example, what if Google decides, you know what, if you're playing on the Stadia, we're going to throttle your internet speed. So you're going to get not great internet, and the only way that you can have the best internet for your area is if you pay us a premium fee, or in order for you to get Stadia Plus so that you can have this subscription service with the fast internet. Net neutrality would have prevented that. It doesn't anymore. So that's another thing that you're going to have to pay if Google decides to do that. Of course, I feel like there would be a lot of pushback for that, but they'd be fully within their legal rights. They're not breaking any laws by doing that. The Stadia is something that I feel like, once again, it is the future, but it is such an unknown product. It is such an untested concept. This isn't the next PlayStation. This isn't the next Xbox or the next Nintendo product. We don't just go ahead and assume, oh yeah, well, this is going to be okay. They're going to fix a couple of things, but I can make a safe bet buying the Xbox 2 or the PlayStation 5 on day one of their launches. I'm going to be relatively okay. This is completely unknown. So I'm not going to try it day one, but I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are. And from those people, I'm going to look at their reviews and be like, all right, let's see what you got. The Stadia is such a big unknown, and there's so many factors going into it. But also, going back to this whole idea of net neutrality, even if you pay for fast internet, you're still relying on the area that you're in. I imagine Australian gamers are going to have a terrible time with the Stadia. The Stadia is, again, like I said, it's the first of many. I just don't believe that I'm going to take the risk on it on day one. In fact, that's not even a question of I don't think I will. I guarantee you I will not. But that's the Stadia. I feel, once again, it's the first of many. But there's going to be some things that we have to iron out first. So that's the Stadia. Let's move on to EA. We'll talk about some of the games here. I don't want to really focus on the press conferences here because they're not really that important anymore. I want to focus on the games. So with EA here, the thing that they did was that they didn't have a press conference, which is great because their press conference last year and the year before that was not great. So they put a focus on the games. So they had like a stream. But the problem was they really, in my opinion, there was only one game that was worth showing off. And they did it right at the start. It's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, made by the same people who do Apex Legends, who do Titanfall. I'm a big fan of their work. Granted, I've never played Apex Legends, but this is Respawn. These are good guys. If you watch the demo, you can see the wall running. There's shades of it in there. These guys have been great. I've been a huge fan of them. The problem with Jedi Fallen Order is, while I am excited that it's a Star Wars game that's not Battlefront, and while I am really, really interested in the idea of them exploring the time period post-Order 66, there is no real canon thing out there that sheds a light on this time period. I'm sure there are, like books and comics and stuff. I know Rebels kind of does it, but in my opinion, you're playing as a Jedi that survived Order 66. That is very interesting. And you're seeing the early days of the Empire. That's interesting. And I would love all of that. That's the appeal for me. Respawn, Star Wars, that's not Battlefront, and also the time period that they're in, they've got me with that alone. But then they did the gameplay. And the gameplay just didn't seem all that great. It wasn't bad. I'm not saying that it was bad. I'm saying that it didn't hook me. It lacked that hook. It looked fine. And also not that I really care about graphics. I've always said graphics don't matter, and I will continue to say that. They don't. I just felt like this game didn't look as good as a game in 2019 should. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they cut corners and graphics were the corner that was cut. Now, it's not a very pretty game. In fact, I was looking at the lightsaber. I was like, the lightsaber looks different. Like, it's a lightsaber. I know it's a lightsaber, but it doesn't have the white core. You know what I mean? It's kind of light blue, and it kind of threw me off. It was pulling me out. I looked at this demo, and I said to myself, it looks like a game that is like Jedi Force Unleashed. Not Jedi Force Unleashed. That's not the name of that game. Star Wars The Force Unleashed. Just without the Unleashed part. The whole hook of Force Unleashed was the idea of you playing as a Jedi who was, number one, Vader's apprentice, which is a brand new concept, unless the comics explain it. I am not going to try to be an expert in everything Star Wars. I don't know about the extended universe stuff. I don't know if Vader ever had an apprentice before that game, but that was interesting to me. That was new to me. But also the fact that he was super overpowered with the Force. You could blow a hallway apart, pull a Star Destroyer out of the sky. That game was great. But this game doesn't have that hook. It's not like watching a Last of Us demo where you're seeing the enemy AI react in a very interesting, very smooth way. Like it feels like you're in that scenario. The animations in that game and the way that game was coded was brilliant. And I'm so excited for 2. This game lacked that hook. And I look at it and I was like, yeah, okay. Like I'm going to play it anyway for the things that I already talked about. But just watching the gameplay, the most important thing about a video game is it fun? And I'm not saying that it looked bad. I'm just saying that I'm afraid that I'm going to play this game and I'm going to be like, yeah, I mean, it's a game. It didn't do anything that interesting. It was completely reliant on its story, which once again, I'm glad that EA is realizing that they've made errors. And so they've already said we're not doing loot boxes. We're not doing a focus on the loot game or microtransactions. That we're going to focus on story, a single player element. They didn't say that they weren't going to have a multiplayer. I don't know. There's something about this game. Maybe it's just because I have a general mistrust for EA now that I just don't believe them. But also, just from the demo, it didn't look all that great. Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it wasn't that interesting. But that's pretty much the only thing from EA that I felt was worth talking about that was new. But I also noticed things that they didn't talk about, like the new Dragon Age game. I think it was last E3 or some other announcement before that, they talked about Dragon Age 4. Not officially titled that, but they were saying the Dread Wolf Rises. I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know if anybody knows what that means. But they didn't talk about it at all. Now, I've heard rumors that they've been reworking that game completely, but I don't know if that's a reaction to some of the stuff BioWare has done lately. For example, Mass Effect Andromeda. I am still going to die on this hill. Maybe I already have. As far as Mass Effect Andromeda not being as bad as people made it out to be. It wasn't great. There were definitely corners that were cut. But that game did not deserve the hate that it got. And the fact that EA just completely abandoned it and just said, we're not doing any DLC for it, we're not supporting it anymore. That to me was a betrayal. But beyond that, knowing behind the scenes that game was sacrificed so that Anthem would do well made me think that, okay, Anthem has to do well. It has to be perfect. And it wasn't. I got vibes from that early on, that it's focusing on the loot game. It's focusing on the grinding of gear and levels and stuff. I was like, that's not a game that I enjoy. This is the same vibe that I got from Destiny, and I was right about that. And guess what? I was right about Anthem as well. It looked good. It looked pretty, but guess what? It lacked the content. It put too much focus on a very specific type of gamer, and it didn't pan out. So they sacrificed the Mass Effect series so that they can make Anthem good, and Anthem wasn't good. So what does that mean for Dragon Age in the future of BioWare? Remember, EA loves to cancel their smaller studios. So I am terrified for BioWare right now. I love BioWare, and I feel like they do their best work when they're not being micromanaged, and EA has been micromanaging them, telling you should put this in, we need a Destiny clone, you need to do this and that. And I feel like that they're not allowing the brilliant storytellers, the brilliant world builders that are BioWare's creators and developers. EA's not letting them do that. And so BioWare, as a result, is suffering. So I'm just concerned about the overall BioWare studio. What does this mean for Dragon Age? What does this mean for Mass Effect? They said they were going to put the franchise on ice. Doesn't mean that they were canceling it outright. I'm just worried about things going forward. So that's EA. That's the only thing about EA that I'm going to talk about. So let's move into Microsoft. So Microsoft, I'm not going to talk about every game. I'm just going to talk about some of the games. Gears of War 5, coming out September 10th. We didn't see too much about this game. There were some little flashes, little trailers. They talked about Horde mode coming back. They have a new game mode called Escape, which is, I guess, you're just fighting through enemies and progressing throughout the level, like trying to escape the area. And then they also highlighted the fact that they are going to be focusing a lot on the character of Kate in the story, which is, if you ever played Gears of War 4, makes total sense. Like, that's the main character of this game. And I feel like that's the right way to go. September 10th is way earlier than I thought it was. I was expecting it to be something closer to November. I would even guess like probably even spring, which, by the way, we're going to get into that. There's going to be a lot of spring releases or rather in 2020. But no, September 10th is way earlier than I expected it. So I'm very, very, very excited for that. Moving on here, Dying Light 2. I loved Dying Light 1. I feel like that's a very, very underrated game. I love the way that game controlled. I love the world that it was. I love the design of the world. I love the story and the characters that were in that game. That game was just a fun game, and I'm super excited that they're doing Dying Light 2. It has a spring release. They did not give a specific date. They just said it was going to be coming out in spring next year. But also they had a trailer, and they revealed that what I believe is the protagonist is an infected person, which is, how is that going to impact the gameplay? You know, the Dead Rising series, I think it was Dead Rising 2, had a thing where you had to get Zombrex because your daughter was infected and she had to get her shots so that she doesn't turn into a zombie. I wonder if it's going to be something similar to that. But I'm really interested in the Dying Light 2 game because of the fact that it's adding more to choices here. I don't know if it's going to be straight up like choice making even in the story that's going to divert the story. You're going to have multiple endings. I'm certain it's going to be that, because they're even talking about like certain choices that you make are going to have an effect on the world around you. Everything's going to have a positive and a negative effect. And I think that all of those choices will lead to a different ending. Very, very excited for Dying Light 2. If it plays anything like the first one, I'm 100% on board. So let's talk about Cyberpunk 2077, which, here's my problem with Cyberpunk right now. It's CD Projekt Red. These are the guys who did The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and the other Witcher games. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, I still retain one of the best games that I've played in recent memory. And the fact that they're doing something a little new, I like the world that they've been building with all these CGI trailers that we've been seeing, and the fact that CD Projekt Red is going to be behind it. I'm sure that this game is going to be great. The problem is that the only thing that we've really seen are CGI trailers. You can only get me so far when you're only talking about CGI trailers, because you're building the world and you're showing that there's a strong narrative element and there's a strong focus on characters. But unless I see extended gameplay, you're not really going to hook me. Now, we did get glimpses of the gameplay this year. 39 seconds of gameplay. Now, they have said that they are going to be putting out an extended gameplay very soon, but I was just worried, like, is there a reason why you're not showing it? Like, why wasn't it ready for E3? This was the year to do it. This game is coming out April 16th. In fact, they did this thing where they brought out Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is in the game. They had him come out. He's not really the best presenter because he came out, he was like, Cyberpunk. So you can tell that he didn't really know what to say, but it was just exciting to see him there. He's the internet darling right now. I am very excited. I love him in the Wick movies, in The Matrix, and he's got a couple of movies out there that aren't that great, but I think he's just a stand-up guy. He's great, and they heckled him too, and they were like, "You're breathtaking." He's like, "But you're breathtaking." Sorry, I had the mic there, but it was a good E3 moment, bringing Keanu Reeves out there, revealing that he's actually in the game. But again, like I said, I just have a little bit of reservations. Like, is there a reason why they're not showing the gameplay? Like, why haven't we seen gameplay? So that's the only concern that I have going forward. I am not getting a bad vibe here, other than I'm just, speculating. I'm just kind of stutter stepping a little bit, but I'm not getting a vibe where I feel like from Anthem or Destiny where I was like, oh, there's some vibe that I'm getting from here that's making me go away. If I were to make a prediction, Cyberpunk 2077 is probably going to be a Game of the Year contender. But I just want to see the gameplay so I can confirm that that's real. Anyway, moving on from that, they talked about the next Xbox, but not really. So they revealed, they were like, this is Project Scarlet. They did the same thing for Project Scorpio. It's a non-announcement, but they did reveal this is a next-gen console. This is not a new iteration on the Xbox One, because the Project Scorpio, what we now know is the Xbox One X, is a variation on the Xbox One. This is a brand new next-gen console. And they messed up the Xbox One's launch. They wanted it to be, okay, what we want it to be is the center of entertainment for your living room. We want your TV, movies, music, sports, everything's going through here, games as well. They messed it up. They forgot who buttered their bread, and that is gamers. So they readjusted themselves. They refocused. But the problem was Sony took advantage of that. And Sony was like, well, we are not forgetting about the gamers. And then they've been ahead ever since. So I think at this release, they are starting to course correct. They're like, we're talking specs, we're talking teraflops, and this, that, and the next. And they did put out a release window for fall 2020. The thing about Project Scarlet is that it's such a non-announcement. We knew that they were doing it. You couldn't give us a name for the console. You couldn't even show the console. I thought they were. They were zooming in and they were like these, like, I thought it was the box. I thought it was white, and they never showed it. Like when they were doing the presentation, they just had the creators and the designers and the engineers all just talking about it. Nothing. They didn't reveal anything other than, oh yeah, it's Project Scarlet. It's coming out next year. It's next gen. That's about it. We're not going to tell you what it's actually called, nor are we going to tell you or show you what it looks like. I just felt like that was a waste of time. It was a non-announcement. But they did kind of shift over and talk about Halo Infinite, which is the next Halo game after Halo 5 Guardians. I was not a fan of Halo 5. I thought the story and the single player element, or the campaign, I should say, it missed. It swung and it missed. The marketing for that game, I actually know a guy who actually worked on the marketing for that game, and he asked me, he was like, was the game that? I was like, I wish the game was that. Those like Find the Truth or whatever it was called, and they had like the different perspectives of Locke and Chief. That would have been an amazing game, and that wasn't what we got. Multiplayer wise and gameplay wise, the game was great, but I feel like Halo Infinite has taken a little bit longer to develop because of the critiques that Halo 5 got. Maybe they had one direction that they were going to go in. Maybe they were like, oh, Locke is going to be the next, face of the franchise. And after all the hate that Locke got, I feel like maybe they course corrected and they're like, no, it needs to always still be Chief. Which they showed a trailer. It's not really a trailer. It looks like a gameplay cutscene. I'm sure that's a gameplay cutscene. I don't know where in the game that's going to be. I don't think anybody really, other than the people that showed it, know where that is going to be. I don't know if that's the opening cutscene, or if it's going to be something maybe a little into the game. But it basically shows, they never really say what the ship is, but there's a ship in space. It's a UNSC ship. There's a guy there, and you can get the impression that he's been stranded there. And then he discovers Chief. He unlocks his armor, reactivates his armor. Chief has the AI chip that Cortana used to be in. As spoilers for Halo 5, but Cortana is not dead. Cortana, I think, is being built up as the main villain, which I think is a great storytelling element. It's interesting. There's a couple of questions going in here. Like, there's a Halo ring, and the Halo ring is broken. Is that the same Halo ring that we saw during the legendary ending of Halo 5? How did it break? It doesn't look like any of the other Halo rings that we have seen in the past, but they all look the same. But some are broken and some are not. This one's broken, but not in a way that we have ever seen a Halo ring broken before. So I think it's a new Halo ring. Interesting. I love me some Halo. I was very, very disappointed by Halo 5, so I'm really hoping that Halo Infinite is a course correction for the franchise. It is going to be a launch title for the Scarlet, so we're going to be seeing that in fall of 2020. That's pretty much it. That's worth talking about with Microsoft, except for the fact that there was no mention of Fable. And I feel so bad because I have a friend who is a huge Fable fan. And when they closed down Lionhead Studios, she was like, well, are they done? Are they never going to make a Fable game ever again? And I was like, no, I doubt it. I feel like they're going to just give that to somebody else. And then they gave it to the developers of the Forza Horizon series, I believe. The name of the studio I'm forgetting. I think it's called like Playground Games or something. And they have been working on some new open world RPG-like game. And a lot of people were saying, well, that's Fable. For sure, that's Fable. And I thought that they were going to at least give a teaser last year. They didn't. So I thought, oh, for sure they're going to do it this year. So I texted my friend and I said, hey, get ready for an announcement for Fable. And she was all excited. And then they didn't do it, which makes me look like a stupid asshole. Why didn't you just talk about, hey, we're making a Fable game. The series is not dead. We retain the license. And we're going to be making a new one. Maybe even let us know, is this going to be a Fable 4, a continuation of the world that you've already been building? Is this going to be a reboot? I almost wish that it is going to be a reboot. But I am blown away that they never even talked about it. So anyway, that's Microsoft. Let's move on to Bethesda now. So Bethesda, they kick things off with Todd Howard. They talk about Fallout 76. Now, Fallout 76 was a game last year that they revealed, and it is a Fallout game that has a strong multiplayer element. And I saw that and I was like, that's interesting because I feel like Elder Scrolls and Fallout should have some sort of cooperative element. You should be able to like have a drop in, drop out co-op. Like I would love to explore dungeons and slay dragons with a buddy of mine. But because this game was fully focusing on the multiplayer thing, That's where the bad vibes and the bad, like, I got that feeling. And I wasn't wrong. Again, not to pat myself on the back for all the times that I'm right, but I'm going to pat myself on the back for the fact that I'm right. The game didn't have a great launch. But even then, like, even before the game came out, Todd Howard was like, look, we haven't really ever done something like this before, so we're going to stutter step a little bit. We're going to do beta tests, or this is very experimental for us. We've never done something like this before. And then the game came out and it didn't do that great, which I appreciated that they addressed that the game had problems. They didn't do the EA thing with Mass Effect Andromeda. They didn't see that there were multiple problems, that it was getting bad reviews, and that people were having a not great time with the game, and that the game lacked a lot. There wasn't a whole lot to do in the game. Instead of abandoning the project, they continued to support it. And they talked about a lot of that during this year's E3. They talk about the DLC Wastelanders, which is adding in human NPCs, dialogue trees, narrative elements, quest lines, and then they also added in the Nuclear Winter. And Nuclear Winter is basically Battle Royale for Fallout 76. Now, I am going to go off a little bit of a tangent here to talk about the Battle Royale stuff, because I did have a conversation with somebody online about how Battle Royales are ruining gaming. And I'm like, no, they're not. It's a game mode that has been a very trending game mode, and now it's starting to get adopted into AAA stuff. I think it's great because it's optional. Now, I don't like games that are completely made from the ground up to be the Battle Royale thing. Like, I feel like Black Ops 4 is that. I know it has other multiplayer stuff, but the fact that they sacrificed a story and a campaign for Black Ops 4 in favor of the Battle Royale, that I feel like was a mistake. But like Apex Legends, Fortnite, PUBG, these are all things where I was like, these are not the type of games that would appeal to me. But I do appreciate when games that have other elements, like if they release Elder Scrolls 6 and it is everything and more that Skyrim had, but then also there was a side Battle Royale option, I wouldn't be mad that the Battle Royale was there. I would almost appreciate it. It's more to do in the game. At some point, somebody created the first team deathmatch. At some point, somebody created the first capture the flag or the first domination. And then everybody else after that adopted it. This is just the newest wave in that. The Battle Royale game mode is a very popular game mode. So AAA games are starting to adapt their own version of it. So I'm not mad about that. But that's Fallout 76. I appreciate it. It's not a game that I'm going to go and play anymore, ever. I think I had a little bit of interest, but something kept me away, and I don't think I'm ever actually going to go for it. But I did appreciate that they addressed the fact they're like, all right, look, we didn't have a great launch, but we're still going to support it, and we're going to try to fix it, and we're going to move forward. But I think that studio, Bethesda Game Studios, the Todd Howard team, I don't think that they deserve the flack that they've gotten because of the negativity surrounding Fallout 76. Moving on from that, we're going to talk a little bit about Ghostwire Tokyo. So this is by Tango Games, headed up by Shinji Mikami, who's the godfather of survival horror. Not a survival horror game. This is a horror action adventure game about people who just go missing. And it's very paranormal. There's some paranormal elements, like there's a big mystery. You're supposed to go and figure out, why are people disappearing? Why did they get Thanos snapped? Did somebody collect the Infinity Stones and snap their fingers? We got to figure out what's going on here. But when I played The Evil Within 1, I loved it, but I thought that gameplay was very challenging, and I appreciated the gameplay. But I feel like narratively it was very confusing. Then The Evil Within 2 came out, and that was more action-adventure because there was a sort of open world element. It wasn't really open world. I wouldn't qualify that game as an open world, but there was a town that you had to make your way through in order to get to the next objective. And I love the fact that it had a horror element. And I was like, man, I would love a game that allowed some degree of free roaming, but horror elements all the way through. Like, imagine a game on the scale of Skyrim, but it was just entirely horror. That is something I would love, and I'm kind of hoping that that's what Ghostwire is, but we will find out. They didn't give a release date for it or a window for it, so I have no idea when it's going to come out, but I don't think it's going to be this year. Then there's a game called Deathloop, which is made by the same people behind the Dishonored games. It's on an island, and it features a guy and a girl, but these two individuals seem to be drawn to a conflict with each other. You kill one, they respawn, they come back. You kill the other, they respawn and come back. And it's this death loop that they're in. You've seen some of the special abilities, like the girl does like a blinking warping move. The guy has like these things coming out of his arm, which allows him to use some sort of telekinetic powers. I'm wondering if this is a multiplayer game, like if these two characters are player-controlled characters, and as you're going through the game, you're always being hunted by this other player. So there is no gameplay of it. It was just a CGI trailer, but very fascinating. You know, I would be very interested in seeing more. Wolfenstein Youngblood coming out. Wow, that's actually way sooner than I thought. July 26th. This is a cooperative game. You get to play as, I think it's BJ Blazkowicz's daughters. I hope I'm saying his name right. And you just go kill Nazis with a friend. I never played Wolfenstein 2. I'm a little mad at myself for I started it and I just never finished it. I think I might maybe one day go back to it. Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Wolfenstein is such a fun game to play. The first one was anyway. And New Colossus, I just never got around to it. Or at least never really gave it the time of day. Like when I say I've played it but never finished it, I mean I started the first couple missions and then just stopped after that. So I never really started it, in my opinion. But no, that's a game that is coming out very soon, like in about less than 2 months. Doom Eternal, though, was one of the bigger games that I was really excited about for Bethesda's press conference, and we did see a lot of the gameplay there. Very fast-paced gameplay. You just turn around and you switch out from a shotgun to a chainsaw to a bazooka to this, that, a sniper rifle, and you're just like, and I'm like, that's exactly what I want this game to be. I just want more Doom. It doesn't look that different from the Doom from, I believe it was 2016, which I love that game. It was one of my favorite games of that year. But I just feel like this game, it's just more of the same. You're just going around and you're just killing a whole bunch of demons in really cool ways. Just rip demons apart. I'm on board for that. I don't really care. You can make the exact same game with new levels, and that might be what this is. But it's coming out November 22nd. They talked a little bit about the battle mode and multiplayer, so it will have a multiplayer element. But battle mode is basically you have a demon slayer, or what do they call it? The Doom Slayer. So that's player controlled. And then you have two demons that are also player controlled. And then they just go into conflict with each other. So interesting game mode that they decided to highlight. So I would definitely check that out. However, nothing about Starfield, which blew my mind. Because I was like, when Todd Howard came out, I was like, oh, they're going to talk a little bit more about Starfield. Because I love, again, big fan of Todd Howard, big fan of his team, big fan of Elder Scrolls, big fan of Fallout. But they never really got a chance to work on something that was a brand new IP for them, something original to them. And that is what Starfield is. So just for that alone, I am very interested in Starfield. And I was hoping to have seen a little bit more information for it, and we didn't get it, which I was a little disappointed by, because I get that Todd Howard and his team like to hold the cards close to their chest. They don't like to reveal things too early, because that's what they did with Fallout 76. That's what they did with Fallout 4. That's what I think they're going to do for Elder Scrolls 6. But for both Elder Scrolls 6 and Starfield, they did reveal it. They did talk about it. And since you have, now people are going to ask about it. Now people are going to notice when it's not there. Whereas if you never said anything about Starfield, or you never said anything about Elder Scrolls, I'm sure people would ask about Elder Scrolls 6. But if you're not talking about it, I just am noticing when it's not there. That's all I'm saying. Which highlights a whole other issue of people announcing things too early, but that's a discussion for another time, or maybe even later in the show. Who knows? I was kind of hoping I didn't think that they were going to do anything with Elder Scrolls 6, but I was secretly hoping that they would at least reveal a subtitle for it, because that's every Elder Scrolls game. Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind. Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. Elder Scrolls 5, Scrim. And then we get to Elder Scrolls 6. I was hoping we would get some sort of subtitle. We didn't get it, but I'm not so surprised by that. I am a little surprised by the lack of information on Starfield. So that is Bethesda. Let's move on to Ubisoft. There's not a lot to talk about here, I'm going to be honest. Watch Dogs Legion. Now, I played the first Watch Dogs when it came out. And that was a game that I feel like it was a very interesting concept as far as gameplay-wise that quickly played itself out while you're playing the game. The main character wasn't great. The story was okay, but that game was just simply wrapped up as saying it was okay. So because of that, I really never played Watch Dogs 2. And then Watch Dogs Legion. I think it leaked a little bit early. Ubisoft's not great with their leaks. But they announced the game officially here at E3. And I'm watching it, and the demo is weird, because I was watching it, and I'm like, the guy's getting shot, he's taking damage, and I'm like, did he just die in the middle of an E3 demo? But then that was the point, because there are multiple playable characters. You don't play as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 characters. There are multiple playable characters. The idea of permadeath is in this game. So you work up the stats of and the specialties of each character, and you build up your legion. You build up DedSec, which is the organization in this game that I believe that you play as and you join up in. Very interesting concept. Like we earlier in the show, we talked about gameplay demos needing a hook. This was the hook. 100%. I'm going to play Watch Dogs Legions for sure. And you don't even really, you got a little bit of a longer wait, but it is a spring release for March 6th. I'm very, very interested in this game all of a sudden. They talked a little bit about the next Ghost Recon game, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, coming out later this year, October 4th. John Bernthal's in this game. They actually had him come out and talk about the game a little bit. He had a dog with him. That is definitely going to win the internet over. The idea of this game is that there are two organizations. You have the Ghosts, which have always been in Ghost Recon, but then you also have the Wolves, which seems like these are former Ghosts. Now, I don't know if this is a multiplayer-focused game. Like, do you have one side is Ghosts, one side is Wolves, and people are going to play as both? Or are you playing as Ghosts and John Bernthal's the villain? Or are you playing as the Wolves against your former comrades? There's a lot of questions here. Really didn't get a whole lot of answers. But, yeah, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Coming out October 4th. Now, Just Dance 2020. Normally, I wouldn't care about Just Dance 2020, but weirdly enough, they had like a little bit of a trailer, like, this is the moment, like, hyping everybody up, and I was like, nobody cares. Nobody cares. But then they did that stupid thing. They usually open up their conferences with the Just Dance stuff where everybody comes out and they're all dancing. They do that about midway through this time. And then I noticed something. They started playing Blackpink's Kill This Love, and I was like, you've gained points from me. Then I noticed that they weren't doing any of the choreography. And I'm like, wait a second. This is a dance game. It's all about dancing. You played a song that has very strong choreography and you don't use it? So they gained points and then instantly lost it. Now, that's all I'm going to say about Just Dance 2020 because I just found it funny. I was like, oh, man, you used Blackpink and then you gained points and then you lost it because you didn't have the balls to go ahead and do the choreography. I don't know if there's any like copyright issues with that. Like they weren't allowed to do it, but I feel like if you use the song, it's fine if you dance to it. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's pretty much it as far as Ubisoft. Ubisoft didn't have shit, man. Aside from Watch Dogs Legions, that was the only thing that was interesting. There was no Assassin's Creed this year, which I originally, when I was watching it, I was like, oh my God, they're not going to show any Assassin's Creed. They had the Assassin's Creed Symphony, but I feel like that was an attempt to do like when the orchestra for God of War, before that game came out. Remember that press conference we were talking about where it was just game? Well, in the beginning, they had like the God of War orchestra, and it was a very powerful performance, and it led right into the gameplay. I think they tried to do the same thing here, and I was expecting it was going to lead into the next Assassin's Creed game, but apparently before that, it was revealed that Assassin's Creed was going to be skipping this year, which is fine. I feel like the Assassin's Creed franchise has had some new reinvigorated life. They don't need to be an annual game anymore. I think the rumor was that the next Assassin's Creed game would be in a Viking time period, so I was really, really, really interested in that. And I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get it this year, and we have to wait a little bit longer for that. But no new news on a Splinter Cell game, which I was for sure hoping that they were going to do this year, and they didn't, and that's very disappointing. I'm a massive Splinter Cell fan. I was a huge fan of Blacklist. I want to play more Spies versus Mercs, but unfortunately the Blacklist servers are dead, so there's not anything you could do in that respect. But also, not that I care, because I've never played the original, and just because of the name, I don't really care about the sequel or prequel, whatever it is. No Beyond Good and Evil 2. You know, I was hoping to see something extended gameplay, because again, it's the same problem with Cyberpunk 2077 where I haven't seen any gameplay for it. It's all just CGI trailers. It's all just a bunch of people talking about it, but I haven't ever really seen the game in motion. So you need to show me something. I thought for sure it was going to show up. Never did. Not even a mention, which I thought was crazy. They ended the press conference, honestly, with a game, I believe it's called Gods and Monsters, which is developed by the same people behind Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And I thought it was interesting that that was the note that they chose to end on. It looked a little cartoony. It's not really something that gains my interest. I don't think the trailer grabbed me. But I think there's a reason why they decided to close out on that. So I think that alone is very interesting. So let's move on to Square Enix. Now, Square Enix had the Final Fantasy VII Remake take up the beginning portion of their conference. This is a true remake. I know I put out the video about Resident Evil 2 changing the way that we view remakes in the future. And And then I made a funny joke about how I say funny. I made a joke. I don't know if it was funny or not, but I made a joke about how I haven't heard anything new about the Final Fantasy VII remake, or even if it was still happening. It is. It's coming out March 3rd. It has a release date. That actually got revealed, I think, during E3 before the press conference. But this is a true remake. They are revamping the combat, but you're still being able to switch between characters. They are still adding in, like, you can still do the special abilities. Here's the thing, though. With remakes like this, the concern is obviously the gameplay, because that is the most important thing with games. Not to say that the original had a lot going for it in the side of gameplay, but this is the thing that I was trying to point out in my video originally, where if the gameplay is not good, then the remake is not good. So I don't think that there's a way that you could... Well, there is definitely a way that you can make bad gameplay. So if the gameplay is not good, then this game will not be fun. It doesn't matter if you have the same characters and the same dialogue and the same story, which I feel like are all going to be the same. They're just completely reworked and are modernized now. I just feel like at this point, the demo looked great. It looks like a fun game, and I'm 100% going to play it because I've never played the original, and it gives people like me a chance to jump in on the hype train and be like, why is this hailed as one of the best, if not the best, Final Fantasy game? Well, now I get to find out. So I'm excited for it. Just hopefully the gameplay is that great. Coming from the people behind Gears of War Judgment and Bulletstorm, they are doing Outriders. Now, just a CGI trailer, no mention as far as a release date or a release window, but looking at Outriders, it's a game that looks like they're on some sort of alien planet, and then they have these big giant creatures that you fight. They kept saying during the demo, or rather, it wasn't a demo, during the presentation, during the trailer, that this was the game that the people... the developers wanted to make. And so for some reason, there was something about the trailer that just hooked me. And so I'm like, you know what? Outriders, you have my attention. I'm going to keep a close eye on you. And then we finally get to the Avengers, which this is why I wore the hat today. The Avengers game was teased, I think, about 2 years ago. It was just called the Avengers Project. I was hoping to hear about something from it last year, and we didn't get to it. But this year, we finally did get to it. And we got glimpses at what looks like gameplay, glimpses as to what the story is going to be, how it's going to play, and then also we met the cast. It has a great voiceover cast. It looks good. I know a lot of people were expecting this game, going into this game, and they were like, it doesn't look anything like the characters from the movies. I hope they were supposed to use the likeness. I was like, no, they weren't. Anybody that's disappointed by the fact that the characters don't look like Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo, like, duh, this is a video game. It's not connected to the MCU, so it's a different interpretation. The story of the game is that the Avengers are celebrating their opening of a base on the West Coast, and they're starting up the West Coast Avengers. Then something terrible happens. 5 years go by. The world has lost faith in the Avengers, and now something has happened that forces them to come back. Now, the characters that are in this game that they're focusing on are Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, and Black Widow. No anybody else. But I feel like there will be more because you do see Hank Pym at some point later on. Now, here's the concern. A lot of people, for some reason, are a little hesitant about this game and the way that it looks. And I originally was like, well, what are you talking about? Like, I thought the gameplay looked great. But honestly, there were real quick glimpses. There was no gameplay demo. They showed you gameplay or what looks like gameplay. But the question is, how does this game actually play? Is this really what they're building it up to be? I think it is going to have a strong narrative element. I think it is going to have a strong single player element, but maybe it doesn't. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation and language about how this game is played, what we can expect from it, especially since Square Enix has said that games as a service model is the future for it. And I don't agree with that statement. I thought Avengers looked great. But then all of a sudden, I'm thinking to myself, after hearing the media react to it, I'm like, ooh, maybe maybe we do need the stutter step here. Also, I noticed that people were drawing links to the PS4 exclusive Spider-Man game, because the Avengers are obviously in that world. There's a tower in that game that is Avengers Tower in New York. And I think if it's a landmark, so if you take a picture of it, he reveals that the Avengers are on a mission somewhere on the West Coast. So a lot of people are saying like, oh, in this game, they're on the West Coast. They're not in Spider-Man because they're on the West Coast. Are these two games connected? I don't know if they are. But I think that it's a little bit more than a coincidence. If you look at the Venom movie that came out, Amy Pascal, who I believe is the person who's in charge of Spider-Man on the side of Sony. Spider-Man is in the MCU. We know this. But also Venom came out. And so a lot of people were wondering, is Venom connected to the MCU? And I think that they left things open enough so that they could integrate him into the MCU, especially following the events of Endgame. I'm not going to get into spoilers or anything, but there's definitely a way that they can bridge the two worlds together, that they can bring Venom into the MCU. And I think that this game is doing of something very, very similar, where they are leaving the door open, but they're not actually connecting it. Like they're not connected, but if they do decide to connect, then the pieces will just perfectly in line. So I think that this is a very similar scenario. So we're not going to see this game for about a year. May 15th is the release date for it. I feel like we need to see more. Like I need to see an extended gameplay demo. I thought it looked great at the time, but then people made me second guess it. So beyond that. All right, so let's talk about some Nintendo stuff because I want to talk about two things here. Number one, Pokemon Sword and Shield. I'm looking at this game. It is on the Switch. You got a new generation of Pokemon. You got some new gameplay elements in terms of, I think it's called the Dynamax thing, where your Pokemon just gets like super large, and then there are raid battles related to that. I think this is going to be a very good Pokemon game. But I love the way that the game looks and the way that the game plays, because this is something that I'm looking at and I'm thinking to myself, I would love if games from when I was a kid, Pokemon Red and Blue, were this. Like, I want a Pokemon Red and Blue remake, and I want it with this system. If you do that, I will buy a Nintendo Switch. I will do it. I'll finally pull the trigger. If you remake Pokemon Red and Blue into the same style that you have Sword and Shield, 100% I'm in. I will buy a Switch tomorrow. It's free roaming. It's the game that I've always wanted them to make for the Pokemon series, where you see the Pokemon in the tall grass. You can see which ones you're going after. They still have like rare encounters. Like they'll have like an exclamation point pop up. Good game, man. That looks good. Nintendo always does great stuff with their properties. But that's going to be a very interesting game. But I don't think it's going to be enough for me to buy it outright. Only because like when Pokemon came out, I was the target audience. I was about 10 years old, maybe a little less, when Pokemon came out. And when I got old enough to kind of get out of it, that was when they were adding on a lot of newer generations. So I'm more of a Gen 1 kind of person, but Gen 2 even. But I don't really have any interest in the Pokemon series now. I'm not any interest in playing the new game. But I would love it if they just remade and did Pokemon Red and Blue exactly like this. Then we talk about Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel. Now, originally, I didn't know about this until a buddy of mine posted it on Facebook, and then I made a comment being like, oh, big surprise. They're making a new Zelda game. Like, that's not surprising in the least. I was being very cocky and like an asshole about it. But when I looked at it even further, I was like, oh, no. This is interesting. Because it's not like a new iteration into the Zelda franchise. This is a direct sequel to a game that they've already revealed. And I thought, has the Zelda franchise ever done that before? Like, is this going to be story DLC? Did they tack on the Breath of the Wild? But then I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was saying, no, the Zelda franchise has done this before with Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask, in many ways, can be seen as a direct sequel to Zelda Ocarina of Time. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I love Majora's Mask. It plays the exact same way as Ocarina of Time. It's the same system. It's just a very different Zelda game. I'm not saying it's the best Zelda game ever. I'm just saying it's my personal favorite. It's my personal preference. I love that game. It was the first Zelda game I ever played. But Breath of the Wild might be viewed in that way. Breath of the Wild did so well, so they want to do something else in that same style. Also, looking at the trailer, it gives off the impression that maybe the roles of Link and Zelda are flipped. And I started thinking to myself, like, oh my God, you're going to get to play as Zelda. Oh, finally. Why haven't we done that before? Why isn't there a Legend of Zelda game starring Zelda? I mean, it is the legend of her, which blows my mind as well. Like, imagine being Link, the guy who goes through all these dungeons, fights these monsters, saves the princess from the evil Dark Lord Ganondorf or whatever. And people remember the legend of her. It's like, what? You didn't do anything. I always thought that was funny. But no, I mean, you have my attention, Breath of the Wild sequel, whatever you are. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So that's it as far as E3 this year. Look, there were a lot of things that I expected to see and that we did see, but there really wasn't a whole lot that wowed me. There were no big surprises. No, like, oh my God. Like, yeah, we have Ghostwire, the Breath of the Wild sequel, Outriders. There were a lot of Watch Dogs Legions. There were some good things that we saw. I just feel like this E3 was lacking, and I can't help but think that maybe it's because the industry is changing and E3 is refusing to change. So what is the future of E3? I do want to kind of highlight this a little bit because I have noticed even last year and the year before that the format of a press conference is kind of outdated. Nintendo was onto this years prior because there was one time where they did a digital presentation instead of a live press conference. And I feel like that's the way to do it because then you get to control the pacing. Because look, not to add to the stereotype of gamers are awkward, but game developers, it's not their job to stand in front of a live audience and talk about it. And it's evident in every E3. It's the awkward laugh, the misreading of the crowd. Like the Bethesda guy, the one guy was like, yeah, every time. Freaking annoyed the hell out of me. But every time he did that, the developers were all like, yeah, everybody get into it. And we're like, no, it's just him. It's just him. But I feel like you lose some of those awkward, cringy interactions if you control the pacing with the digital presentation. You don't have to worry about if the crowd reacts or not. You don't have to worry about engaging with them incorrectly. You control the pacing. You eliminate the cringy moments. You can add in some special effects and add in some more comical moments. You control the way that your show is viewed if you do a digital presentation. And you also don't have to worry about demos not playing right. You guys remember Uncharted 4's demo when it first got announced? They put that game out and it didn't move right away. Nathan Drake just kind of stood in the crowd for a few minutes before it finally got started. Those are awkward moments when your demo doesn't play right. So when you do a digital presentation, you have more control over that. Or you could do something what Nintendo and EA have done, where instead of doing a live presentation, you put a focus on the games. You live stream the games, you have the commentators come in, and you have them talk about and highlight things and draw attention to things, and you ask them questions and they answer it. That might be the future. Or some developers might just go off and do their own thing. Instead of waiting for E3 in June, you could do something in February. You could do something in March. You could do something in another September or whatever. And then reveal all your stuff then. Sony and Microsoft have done that before. So maybe that's the direction. They just abandon E3 and they do their own show. Or maybe you just put all your eggs in a different basket. Instead of going to E3, you go to Gamescom or something like that. Like go somewhere else to reveal all your stuff. Or you just don't do anything at all. You let developers release things as they become available, because there is this thing where developers will rush to get something ready for E3 just because they have a deadline of E3. We have to show something, so we have to get this together. Then you run into the mistake of the game looks this way at E3 and then this way at launch. So clearly they cut some corners. They made it look pretty for E3 for the marketing, but then the game doesn't look like that. So it almost feels like false advertising. So, but if you're allowing your developers to not rush, you release things when you are ready to release them, and then that's when they have more comfortability and they release things as they become available. And then you don't have to worry about getting into the embarrassing situation of we announced the game a few years ago and then it got delayed. And now, just because we announced it too early, which has always been a big mistake that I feel like, particularly Square Enix gets into a lot. I do feel like there is a need for something like E3. I just feel like E3's almost refusal to adapt to an evolving industry is hurting it. I do think that there is a desire for people to go and play the games, because I need to see gameplay for any game before I just go ahead and grab it. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of game it is. I need to see gameplay. If I don't see the game in motion, then I'm not going to go ahead and grab it. Even if that means I'm going to wait for the game to release and watch other people do it, then I will get an idea as to how the game plays. Otherwise, I'm not going to take a risk, because the game is gameplay. And if it's not there, then what am I paying for? For a story? I can watch a movie. Now, there are some exceptions to the rules, like the Telltale series, but there was a reason why that studio closed down. Because they focused on quantity over quality, and would eventually overworked that entire studio and eventually killed itself. I do think that there is a need for E3, though. Going there, playing the games, talking with the developers, allowing the developers to give us an idea as to how the game plays, what to expect, what to look forward to. Like, it is a way of marketing. And I think it works well with investors. It works well with gamers who are going to be putting their money down to play these games. It's an important thing to have. I just think that E3 might be something that's dying. We might not get an E3 in a few years in the future, because it's refusing to adapt. It's refusing to change. So then we got the Game Awards. We got Gamescom. We might just start seeing things at those things, or people start doing their own thing. Who knows? That's my general impression of E3. A little very, very disappointing this year, but there were some good things to pull from them. Some very interesting things, some things to look forward to in the future. Man, spring of 2020 looks jam-packed. I'm really, really excited for it. Anyway, moving on from that, let's pivot here for a second, because let's talk about Dark Phoenix, because I saw it yesterday and I do want to kind of give my review for it. I'm all marveled up. Like, I got my Stan Lee shirt ready to go to talk about Dark Phoenix. Here's what I do. I've heard the reviews for this movie beforehand. I've seen the Rotten Tomato score. At the time of its release, it was 20%. Yesterday, it was 23%. That was the last time I checked it. Whenever I see a movie that overall is being negatively received, I lower my expectations, so that when I go to see the movie, my expectations are at a certain point, and then I'm like, oh, but that wasn't that bad. It was actually enjoyable. It happened with Terminator Genisys. I know how I said that. I said it right. They didn't spell it right. It happened with Jurassic World, the first one. I never saw Fallen Kingdom. And damn it, I thought of this movie earlier today and I completely... Aladdin. It was Aladdin. I heard that there were mixed reviews on Aladdin, and I went in with lowered expectations. I had a lot of fun with that movie. I thought Jurassic World was a pretty fun movie. I thought Terminator Genisys was pretty passable. And the same thing here. I think Dark Phoenix is better than people are saying it is. Granted, it's not flawless. There were issues with it, and I will talk about those issues, because I feel like in this movie, there are a lot of interesting things that happen. I've seen every X-Men movie except for X-Men 3 Last Stand, which is the last time that they've tried to adapt the Dark Phoenix story. Now, from what I understand, the story in that movie is just one of other stories happening. So this movie is focusing a little bit more on the story of the Dark Phoenix. But the problem with it is that I feel like there's a lot of actors in this movie, particularly Jennifer Lawrence, that are just showing up and phoning it in. They're showing up just to get a paycheck. So the acting, I feel like, in this movie, in certain cases, isn't where it could be. There are a lot of things in this movie that they don't explain, like Beast's ability to... I know that in the past he had a serum to kind of suppress his mutant appearance, because he's just got hair everywhere. He's blue. He's a beast. And he had this serum to make him look normal. And in the past, he's kind of used this serum to still look human. But in this movie, apparently he's able to do it at will. And they never explain why that is. There's a couple of things that don't make sense in this movie. I don't want to get into them because some things are a little spoilery. But I do like Sophie Turner in this movie. I just feel like, and I was listening to a podcast, and I'm going to quote them. I wish I could remember the name of the podcast, but I just want to let people know that I'm not making this up on my own. I'm pulling this from something else. Sophie Turner looks like she's being given a bad script and she's not sure what to do with it. She's giving it her best shot, but I'm not sure she knows what to do with a bad script. And that's kind of the thing here, is that this movie is a little jumbled up, and it does repeat the same beats. This isn't very spoilery, but the whole idea is, if you're familiar with the Dark Phoenix storyline, Jean Grey gains a sort of cosmic power that she can't really control. So what happens in this movie is that it repeats the same beat several times. Jean loses control, Jean flies away. Jean loses control, Jean flies away. Jean loses control, Jean flies away. And it's the same story beat every time. There's a couple of emotional beats that it tries to hit. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't really. But to me, the biggest thing the biggest problem for me in the movie was the villain, which is Jessica Chastain's character. Not that I didn't know what she wanted, I just didn't know where the motivations were coming from. They never really explained her. They never explained the people that she's with. I can make a guess as to what she is, but it's a very different interpretation from what I know versus what is portrayed on screen. They don't really explain what she is, and they don't really explain what the Phoenix Force is. They never actually call it the Phoenix Force. It is just a power that these guys have been trying to get. And now it's in Jean, and then the movie takes place. So there are a lot of questions. I feel like the villain just wasn't great. Jessica Chastain wasn't great. There were a lot of things that happened in the final act of the movie that I think are actually really good. Like, I think some of the things Magneto does and some of the action beats, even throughout this movie, are actually very, very entertaining and very, very cool to see. But the action beats in the beginning of this movie are few and far between. So there's a lot of slower moments that kind of bore me, and I tuned out a couple times. But in the final act, there are some awesome things that go down, particularly with Magneto. But I feel like there were also some questionable things that happened. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers, but your movie is only as good as your villain. And that stems from having good character motivation for that villain. And in this case, Jessica Chastain's character, whatever the hell her name is, because I don't remember it, what a poor villain. This is bad villain. I have no idea why you're here. I know you want the power. I don't know what for or why. I don't know what you are. The movie never really explains it. It's not a bad movie, though. Like, it's not a good movie. It's not a great movie, but it's not a bad one either. There are far worse movies. Dark Phoenix is not the worst movie in the X-Men franchise. However, I decided to go see it. I almost skipped it, but I decided to go see it because I wanted to see the last official Fox X-Men movie before Marvel starts doing their own interpretation of it, because this is an end of an era. I still think the Logan was a better end to this franchise. That's where they should have ended it. But the Disney deal didn't go through at that point, so they were still planning on making more movies. I'm sure that Dark Phoenix was going to be something that was going to lead into other things. They did reshoot the ending for this movie, the final act, and you can tell. This is where the reshot ending takes place. I think originally it was supposed to be in space, but they felt like it was too closely related to Captain Marvel, which I really... whatever. I don't think that that's enough of a reason to reshoot your ending. But not to say that the ending here wasn't good, but you could just tell, this is reshoots, because it has a very different feel than the rest of the movie. I'm like, if the rest of the movie was this, then I'll be totally on board for it. Again, there were certain decisions that characters make during that sequence that are questionable and don't make sense. But that's also throughout the movie as well, where certain things characters do are like, that could have been better executed. Like, that's a stupid move, you doing that. Also, another thing in this movie that I didn't think really worked is the relationship between Jean Grey and Cyclops, which is, they are a couple, they are a thing in the comics. That is the relationship for the X-Men, and I got no chemistry. I didn't believe it. It was not a believable relationship. Not that it was crucial. It wasn't a central part, but it really did affect some of the choices that Cyclops makes, and it's just not a believable relationship. But it's not a bad movie. Overall, my ending statement for it is that it's not a bad movie at all. There are definitely some things that I feel like critics have hit a little too hard on. But overall, I think it was a fine movie. Now, would I recommend you go see it in theaters? Nah, you could skip it. Wait for it to be wait till it's out of theaters. Like, if you want to go and rent it and you want to see it on Netflix or something, or on the Disney Plus thing, or wherever the hell it'll end up being, that's where I would recommend. Like, I think you should see it just for the fact that it's the last Fox X-Men movie. I don't think you need to see it in theaters. Like, you don't have, it's not Avengers Endgame where you got to drop everything and go see it right away. So that's my opinion of Dark Phoenix. Not the worst X-Men movie, not as bad as the reviews say. Also not that great either. But yeah, that's it. That's the show. That's the first episode of a Mostly Nerdy podcast, a show I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. Once again, I'm going to post the full thing up on YouTube so you can watch the whole episode, or you can watch things in segments. And that's the idea that I'm going to go with going forward. We're going to have brand new topics next week. But what was your favorite topic? What did you think about E3? Please let me know in the comments down below. Let's keep the conversation going. I would really appreciate it. And I love interacting with people. So, yep, that's it. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.